For 3 years, Andre worked quietly behind the scenes, refining models, improving prediction accuracy, and ensuring the system remained fair, transparent, and resistant to manipulation. His reputation grew internally as someone who could solve complex problems without creating noise. But despite his contributions, he noticed something strange over time. He was always ranked lower than expected. At first he ignored it, assuming the system might be weighing factors differently than he anticipated, but as months passed, the pattern became harder to dismiss. Employees he had trained, supported, and even corrected were consistently ranked above him, even when their output metrics were clearly lower. Still, Andre didn't jump to conclusions. He trusted the system. After all, he helped build it. But that trust started to crack during a quarterly performance review when the company displayed a live leaderboard in a department meeting. His name appeared near the bottom, while others with visibly lower performance metrics were ranked in the top positions. The room applauded top performers. Andre stayed silent. Later that day, he accessed the internal dashboard to review detailed scoring metrics, and what he saw didn't align with the ranking. His productivity scores were high, his project success rate was among the best in the department, and his error margin was significantly lower than most. Yet his final ranking score was suppressed. It didn't make sense mathematically. So he did what he always did. He investigated the logic. That night, Andre stayed late in the office, pulling raw datasets and running independent calculations outside the main system. And his results confirmed his suspicion, based purely on measurable performance. He should have been ranked in the top 3 consistently, but the official system placed him near the bottom. There was a gap, not in data but in interpretation. Andre began tracing the scoring pipeline step by step, from raw input metrics to final ranking output, and everything appeared correct until the final aggregation layer, where multiple weighted factors combined into a single score. That's where he found something unusual. An adaptive weighting function that adjusted scores based on long-term organizational alignment indicators. The label was vague, too vague. He dug deeper into its configuration parameters, and what he found made him pause. The system was factoring in historical behavioral patterns, team integration scores, and something labeled cultural compatibility. Weighting that last parameter stood out because it was not clearly defined in the original design documentation. Andre pulled historical training data for that module and discovered it was trained on past performance evaluations and promotion decisions from previous years. Data that reflected human decisions, not objective performance. And those decisions, as he slowly realized, were not neutral. They carried patterns. Patterns that influenced how the algorithm learned to rank people. Andre leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Because now the issue wasn't a bug, it was inheritance. The system had learned bias from the past, and was now applying it as logic. The next morning, Andre ran a controlled test, removing the cultural compatibility weighting from the scoring model and recalculating rankings across the department. The results shifted dramatically. His rank moved from near the bottom to the top. And he wasn't the only one affected. Several other employees also changed positions significantly. The pattern was clear. The waning factor was suppressing certain profiles. Andre documented everything carefully and prepared a detailed report comparing original rankings with recalculated unbiased outputs. When he presented it to his direct manager, the reaction was not what he expected. Instead of concern, there was hesitation. This might just be a calibration issue, the manager said calmly, but Andre knew it was more than that. Because calibration errors don't create consistent patterns across specific individuals, they create randomness. This was structured. That realization pushed him further. He escalated the report to the internal AI ethics committee, where discussions became more technical and less dismissive. Engineers began reviewing his findings, auditors checked data lineage, and slowly the narrative shifted from possible glitch to systemic bias risk. During a high-level review meeting, Andre was asked to explain the issue in simple terms to senior executives. He stood in front of the room, calm but focused. The algorithm is not broken, he said. It is doing exactly what it was trained to do. The problem is what it was trained on. That sentence changed the tone of the discussion, because it shifted responsibility from system behavior to system design. Further investigation revealed that historical evaluation data used to train the model contained subtle but consistent biases in how employees were rated for leadership potential and cultural fit. And those biases had been encoded into the algorithm as weight and logic. The system was not just ranking performance. It was ranking perception. Andre's findings triggered a full internal audit of the AI system, and the company was forced to temporarily suspend automated ranking outputs while recalibration efforts began. For the first time, employees questioned the fairness of the system they had trusted without hesitation. But for Andre, the most important moment came not during the investigation, but during a follow-up meeting weeks later. When updated rankings were released, after removing biased weighting factors, his name appeared at the top. The room reacted differently this time, not with surprise, but with realization, because now the numbers made sense. Andre looked at the screen quietly, not proud, not angry, just certain that the system had finally started reflecting truth instead of history. And in that moment, he understood something clearly. Technology does not remove bias, it repeats it, unless someone is willing to question it. In the days that followed, conversations around the office became more cautious. People started discussing rankings in smaller groups instead of openly celebrating them. And for the first time, some employees began asking how the system actually worked instead of just accepting the results it produced. Andre noticed this change immediately, not because people were louder, but because they were thinking more critically. Despite the correction, Andre did not feel a sudden sense of victory, because he understood something deeper. The ranking change fixed an outcome, but it did not automatically fix the process that allowed that outcome to exist for so long without being questioned. A week later, he was invited to join a cross-functional task force responsible for rebuilding the company's AI evaluation framework. This time, not just as a developer, but as someone who had identified a critical flaw in the system. The team included engineers, data scientists, compliance officers, and external ethics consultants, all working together to ensure that the next version of the algorithm would not repeat the same mistakes. During the first meeting, one of the consultants asked a question that immediately set the tone. How do you prevent a system from learning bias if the data it learns from already contains it? The room went quiet for a moment because that question did not have a simple answer. Andre spoke carefully. You don't prevent it completely. You detect it, isolate it, and design the system to question it, instead of blindly learning from it. That idea became the foundation of their work. Instead of building a model that simply optimized for performance based on historical data, they began designing one that actively flagged inconsistencies between performance metrics and final rankings, a system that could raise its own warnings when outputs did not align logically with inputs. It was not just an upgrade, it was a shift in philosophy. Over the next several weeks, Andre spent long hours analyzing past datasets, identifying patterns where high-performing employees were consistently ranked lower due to non-performance-related factors, and those patterns revealed something uncomfortable but undeniable. Bias was not always loud or obvious. It often existed in small adjustments, subtle scoring differences, and vague categories like fit or alignment that were never clearly defined. As the team worked through these challenges, resistance started appearing from certain parts of leadership. Some executives argued that removing subjective factors entirely would weaken the system's ability to evaluate leadership potential. They believed that not everything could be measured in numbers, and that intuition still had a role in decision-making. Andre didn't disagree with that completely, but he challenged how intuition was being translated into data. Intuition isn't the problem, he said in one meeting. The problem is when intuition becomes a fixed rule inside a system that no one questions anymore. That distinction shifted several discussions, because it exposed the risk of turning subjective judgment into automated certainty. As development continued, the team introduced a new feature called explainability layers, which allowed every ranking decision to be broken down into visible components, showing exactly how much each factor contributed to the final score. This change alone made the system more transparent than it had ever been before. Now, no one could look at a ranking without understanding how it was calculated, and more importantly, without questioning whether it made sense. One afternoon, while testing the new model, Andre ran a simulation using historical data from the previous year. But this time with BIOS detection filters active, the results were striking. Multiple inconsistencies were flagged automatically, showing cases where performance metrics and final rankings did not align logically, including his own past evaluations. He stared at the screen for a moment, not surprised but still affected, because seeing it clearly now made the past feel even more real. Later that week, the company held an internal presentation to demonstrate the new system to employees. The room was filled with cautious attention as the updated model was explained step by step. Transparency features were highlighted, bias detection mechanisms were demonstrated, and for the first time, the system was presented not as perfect, but as accountable. Andre was asked to speak briefly at the end. He stood up, looking at the same kind of audience that had once accepted the old system without question. This system is better, he said calmly. Not because it's flawless, but because it's built to recognize when it might be wrong. That line stayed with people, because it changed expectations from trust without question to trust with awareness. In the months that followed, the new ranking system was fully implemented across the company, and the impact was immediate. Employee confidence improved, not just because rankings felt more accurate, but because they could finally understand them. And that understanding created a sense of fairness that had been missing before. Andre continued working on refining the system, but his role had evolved. He was no longer just building algorithms, he was shaping how decisions were made within them, ensuring that performance remained the core factor, while subjective inputs were carefully monitored and controlled. One evening, as he sat alone reviewing system logs after a long day, he thought back to the moment when he first saw his name at the bottom of the leaderboard, and how easily he could have accepted it as truth without questioning it, but he didn't. And that made all the difference, because what started as a personal doubt turned into a structural correction that affected the entire company. As he closed his laptop and prepared to leave, one thought stayed with him. The system hadn't failed him, it had revealed something: that fairness is not automatic, it has to be built, maintained, and questioned constantly, because the moment people stop questioning it is the moment it starts drifting away again.